Hi, this is a brief intro for you prior to our class where we're going to talk about interviewing. We'll also debrief on last week's fieldwork participant observation exercise. Interviewing as a source of data is not just the formal process of sitting down with one person or a group of people with a formal protocol. It can include the kinds of information that comes in participant observation, and we'll talk about that more when we do our debriefing, and also in informal conversations that you might have with people before and after formal protocol interviews. You can think of some interviews, very informal, as just being a guided conversation where you are on as a field worker and really trying to push the conversation to get at the information that will help you understand your questions. Or it can be a more focused conversation, which is mostly what we'll talk about here, that follows a interview protocol. It can also go all the way to being an oral version of a questionnaire with open-ended answers. That's typically used more when you're doing mixed method, where you might have to turn those open-ended answers into forced choice answers to be able to blend it with a more quantitative analysis. Similarly, it might be a questionnaire that has open and closed items, or it could just be a survey where there really isn't any talk at all, except for the person who is basically talking or writing their thoughts in response to your survey questions. And that is still a source of talk and interview, but obviously it's very closed and more likely used in quantitative methods. So just a little review about research questions. And I think that Maxwell does a good job of helping us translate from research questions to interview questions. But just in review, research questions are not your topic. They're what you want to know about your topic. They are not the place. They're what you want to know about the place or what happens in those spaces. Questions are not interview questions. They're not just translations back and forth, which we'll talk about in a minute looking at Maxwell, but the overarching framework of what you want to know. And research questions advance what we know. They give us new perspectives. They can be questions that have already been asked using other methods or from other disciplinary perspectives, or they can be new questions that nobody has thought to ask yet. Let's skip that. Okay, if you look at what Maxwell has to say about the relationship between research questions and data collection methods, I want you to reread this section carefully so that you really understand it. Of course, I've done this in a way that I don't have the page. It's on page 100. The methods you use to collect your data don't necessarily follow from the research questions. The two are distinct and separate parts of your design. A lot of times people do talk about operationalizing research questions and turning each research question into an interview question by translating it. But that idea, as he points out, follows a more positivistic approach to thinking about finding the truth and so forth. There's your methods that you choose, whether it's interviewing, participant observation, document analysis, and so forth, are the means to answering your questions, not just a transformation of them. And what Maxwell goes on to talk about here and in the further examples that he provides is that your interview questions need to be real questions. They need to be closer to guiding a conversation rather than trying to get the person that you're talking with or interacting with to somehow jump to your level of abstraction to discuss your overarching research question with you. You can imagine if you ask your theoretical research question especially if you're using the jargon that you might be pulling from your discipline, a regular person that you're talking with that you've selected very carefully may not be able to answer those questions. Sometimes what happens is people end up asking questions that require the respondent to do the analysis for them instead of just giving data, giving story, giving example, sharing experience, and then you as a researcher analyze that data relative to your big research questions. So reread this section carefully so that you really understand that difference between research questions and then the different methods that we use to generate data. For your individual project, one of the things that you're going to be developing in the next weeks is an interview guide for the interviews that you're doing in your project. An interview guide typically has a description of the overall research exercise written for the lay person. So this is a version of your purpose statement and everything written for participants, not for journal editors or your dissertation advisor. And it also includes how the information is going to be handled. Who are you going to tell? Are you going to use names? Are you going to share personal information? Typically not, and that's where you can clarify exactly how you're going to handle the data and protect the person's privacy. You do that as a prelude to getting their informed consent. And in most cases, there is actually a consent form that has to be signed prior to their participation. And I'm going to have you do this, even though you may not be going through IRB, so that you have the experience of creating an informed consent form and getting informed consent from your participants. If for some reason this is not appropriate to your study, we can discuss that individually. Your guide will also then have the open-ended questions that you plan to ask, and you'll have thought through really carefully how you're going to frame your questions so that you don't suffer from being awkward or forgetting, or so that you can really guide and steer the interview exactly in the direction you want to go. I recommend that people have no more than 4 questions for an interview. Even if you're planning on the interview lasting more than an hour, 4 good open-ended questions that really allow the person to have a conversation with you is plenty. In fact, maybe too many. If you can imagine having a conversation with a friend where you're talking with them about just some topic and asking them questions about a topic that you share in common, in an hour, how likely are you to cover more than 4 kind of general topics, even around the same overarching topic? It takes a while to unpack a conversation. So trying to pack too much into an interview is going to result in data that are not as rich as you would like. That said, for each question or for each area, you should have instructions to yourself, reminders to yourself about follow-up ideas, things that you might ask the person to do if they're having a hard time answering the question, or if they seem to be struggling to talk with you. Things like, can you tell me, can you give me an example of that? Or maybe you have what they call an interview prop, like a picture or a document where you can say, here's this document, here's this agenda from the meeting that I wanted you to reflect upon. Can you walk me through how this meeting went? Something like that. Interview props, those kinds of things. Making sure that you've written out what your goal is for each of the questions you've chosen, and things to remember about those goals. If you write all that out, it may be in your interview guide, you might summarize those goals. But you'll have it in front of you so that as you're doing the interview, if you get off track, you can glance at your goals and it'll help you come back to where you want to go. If you are applying to IRB, you will need to attach an interview guide along with your consent form to your application. Another thing I would like you to do or to think about doing is to do a pilot interview for your individual project once you've figured out the interview guide and everything. And you might want to practice on another classmate in our class so that or if you can find someone who's not in your participants that you've selected, to try it out so that you can practice the interview before you have one of your carefully selected participants in front of you. Then unpack that experience. Don't just do it, but do it and then reflect upon it. Figure out what you need to change in your protocol. Document why you made those changes because you can put that into your methodology later. Um, and be careful about where you have questions that ended up being closed or open. So if you asked a question that had a yes/no answer, or a numerical question like how long have you been driving from the video that you'll watch, uh, the person might say, I've been driving for 15 years. So that those kinds of questions stop short, and you want to try to make sure that you're getting emic, experiential, tell me about it, explain to me how did it feel, those kinds of things. Um, Look at how some of your questions might be answerable in a quick survey or questionnaire. It's okay to maybe do a short demographic questionnaire at the beginning of your study, at the beginning of the interview, to cover some of the basic information that you need from the person that you couldn't get prior to selection, and then move into your interview protocol. So think about whether that's something that you need to do. And then finally go back and adjust your interview guide to capitalize on all the possibilities of actually being with the person face to face. Think about, is there anything that you can do in advance of the interview, in preparation, that you can get out of the way so that your face to face time is capitalized upon. A few tips in general. You need enough time to really have a conversation with a person. At least an hour is typically a good conversational space. That may mean asking for an hour and a half of the person's time so you don't end up getting cut short by someone being late or taking a long time to get going, or someone having to leave or being pressed, or you being pressed by having to leave. So be careful about scheduling. Again, when you do the interview, explain your research, even if you've explained it before, and make sure that you're going through the ethical questions that you need to do, including informed consent. Audio tape the interview if at all possible. In some cases, this isn't practical, but I'm actually going to require this of you for your individual projects, that you do audio taped interviews. And then make sure that you follow up and thank your participant, and even do so again afterwards, as Maxwell cites one of his students saying, the interview isn't over until you've sent the thank you note. Okay, one of the things that I want you to do this semester when you're doing interviews, whether it's in your group interview project exercise or in your individual projects, is to think about your note-taking, your field notes, and also your transcription processes. Now, during the interview, you're not going to be able to take detailed notes. You're going to only be able to jot things down to help you remember maybe something that was mentioned before that you want to go back to. But afterward, you're going to want to go back somewhere quiet and write up the interview in toto. Put together as close a verbatim transcript of the interview as you can, because it'll also allow you to unpack some of the things that you were thinking as the person was talking that led you to ask the probes that you did, and so forth. Don't use the tape for this. These are field notes. This is the field notes on the interview until you've put together your recollected piece. Then transcribe the audio tape and look at the differences between, and this is just a learning moment for you, to look at the differences between what you remembered and what was recorded. And that will tell you, that will help you train a little bit further on being a better interviewer, but it'll also let you think about your project and your questions some more. For your group project, you're going to design an interview protocol in your group to be conducted with classmates in class. And we can only do about 30 minutes or so in order to be able to get it done during our class period. Again, you'll have to be very careful about the questions that you ask, because you only have 30 minutes. Imagine catching up for a friend in 30 minutes. How much can you actually cover? So you'll conduct the interview in class following your group's protocol. This is coming up in a couple weeks. Be sure to attend to the nonverbal data and context clues, and we'll talk some more about those things that happen in an interview. Like I said, write up a verbatim transcript of the interview from your notes. In the group interview project, we're not going to be audio taping, so that verbatim transcript will be the only transcript that you have. Send a copy of that transcript to your interviewee after class and let them review it and maybe add comments and notes. And then also go over that transcript that once you've gotten your feedback with your group in class. We'll make some time in class to do that. And then you'll write a group summary of your interviewing experience for this project. It won't be an analysis of the interview data yet. We'll do that after we finish the focus group project. So just as an advance warning, for your individual projects, you are required to include at least one form of interviewing in your methods. You're required to audio tape your interviews, and we'll talk more about how to do that. You are required to produce a full transcript of at least one of the interviews. Depending on how many interviews you're doing this semester, transcription takes a long time, so you may or may not be able to get to all of that. I would love it if you could get full transcriptions of all of your interviews that you do this semester prior to writing up your final project. And we'll discuss a little bit about creating interview logs and some other alternatives to full transcription, but you need to produce at least one full transcription. And like I said in class, please investigate other sources, the citations such as Cavalli, Irving Seidman's three-part interview. There's lots of different sources on interviewing, and I encourage you to browse through different books, look at articles, start to build your own library of methodological texts that suit the kinds of research that you're doing. You will also want to look at the methodological texts that are from your discipline, because there can be conventions and language that you're going to want to know that's from your own department and field of study, because there are some differences, especially in vocabulary that people use. That's it, and I'll see you next time.